Again, joining us, Roland Roebuck, also Kim Brown, Lenny McAllister, Avis Jones-Deweever. So what do you make of the decision by the president? And clearly, folks like Rubio are not happy at all. But the embargo didn't work.
The embargo did not work for the past 54 years. It's probably not going to work for the next 54 years. So there had to be a change of policy strategy as it relates to Cuba. Cuba is in our hemisphere. They are in our sphere of influence.
200 miles from Miami.
90 miles off the coast of Key West, Florida. And the fact that we are normalizing diplomatic relations, well, we are late in that respect. The rest of the world has normal diplomatic relations with Cuba. And it's about time that this president was going to be the one to push this policy. But it's also a good thing that people are going to be able to resume travel to Cuba. And as we were saying off air, I don't think it's any coincidence that the Obama administration says that they have been in these negotiations for the past year and a half. And it was 1 year and a half ago that Jay-Z and Beyonce traveled to Cuba. It was a big deal. It was well publicized. But
so what? Jay-Z and Beyonce had a letter from the president? Look at here for that.
Look at here. Look at here. But it helped to spark that flame, to at least put it in public, where these hugely public personas were in this nation, enjoying themselves, resuming, wonderful tourism, and the Obama administration was aware of it, and I guess tacitly had their blessing.
Okay, I ain't buying that one.
You got two things going on. You have domestic politics, which is why Rubio's having a fit, because he's trying to paint Hillary Clinton as the third Obama regime.
But here's the problem with that. So Obama has basically narrowed the gap. Republicans have always been able to grab most of the Cuban vote.
And
in the last election, he wiped that away, and younger Cubans don't have the same reaction as older Cubans to Castro and Cuba.
Which is why this is a smart geopolitical move, because we have to solidify the Western Hemisphere when you're starting to talk about the war on terrorism. We always talk about the border being porous at Mexico. But why would you have an enemy sitting 90 miles off the shores of Key West? If you could shore up that relationship and tighten things up in the Western Hemisphere, you can fight the war on terrorism without so much as having to take troops overseas to the Middle East.
Avis?
That's absolutely correct. And also, I don't believe Rubio really is a good reflection even of Cuban-American public opinion. If you look at a poll that we just had back in June, over 2/3 of Cuban Americans wanted to normalize relations.
In fact, more than 50% of Republicans agree the embargo did not work.
Exactly. I mean, it doesn't really take, a genius to figure that out. If you keep doing the same thing for 50 years and something hasn't changed, you can best believe in the next 50 years it's probably not going to change either.
Earlier, we talked with Carlos Gutierrez, former Commerce Secretary for the United States under President George W. Bush. Here's what he had to say.
If you want to do business in Cuba today, so you want to build a factory, right? Mm-hmm. And some Europeans have this. The government tells you who you can hire, and you don't pay your worker, you pay the Cuban government, and you pay them in dollars. They pocket most of it, and then they give pesos, worthless pesos, to the worker. I mean, this is a regime that controls absolutely everything. A lot of U.S. businesses are going to see that and say, I'm not going near this.
Roland, you buy that?
No. We find many of these Cuban Americans taking positions that are not centered on common sense. We are now ready to engage, and the right-wing Cubans are not even relevant to what is happening right now.
We talked with Dwayne Whitcomb, columnist for USA Today. He has made numerous trips over to Cuba, has met with Fidel Castro. Here was his reaction to this decision.
History of relations between Afro-Cubans and African-Americans, one uplifting the other, reaching out to help one another. And I'll just say this very quickly because I know your time is short. When I talk to Cuban leaders in Cuba, you know what they asked me? They said, everyone else is coming here to line up for business opportunities when the embargo ends. They've been saying this to me for a decade. Where are the African Americans we want to do business with our relatives and our friends throughout the diaspora?
All right, then. Let's respond to that, because there's always been this deep relationship between African Americans and the Cuban government. Reverend Jackson's been over there many times. Harry Belafonte, Danny Glover, and many others as well. Cubans have identified with the oppression of African Americans. African Americans have identified with the oppression of Cuba by the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a parallel there that makes sense. Now, we have to really look at ourselves and say, can we please shift some of our foreign policy away from 1962? And that's what we're really looking at right now. We don't deal with Iran the same way now. We still deal with China when it comes from an economic standpoint.
And China's a communist country.
They have all type of communism going on with human rights issues going on as well. This is not China. This is is Cuba, and it's right in our backyard. It makes sense. If we can normalize it and be prudent but be smart about this, why not do it now?
Avis and Kim, we also normalize relationships with Vietnam, common in this country as well.
Right.
Exactly. And I love this point about African-American entrepreneurs taking up an opportunity to go to Cuba and build relationships. I mean, really, we know that in America, we need more black businesses. We've seen huge growth over the past several years. It would be a wonderful coup for African-Americans in the figurative sense, for African-Americans to be able to go to Cuba and take advantage of these relations so that we can build upon the wonderful sense of warmth that we've developed over the decades.
And the other part is that Cuba may not be a huge economic player in this hemisphere, but they are a huge political player when it comes to Latin America. They have been hosting the Summit of the Americas. They are integral in negotiating the end or ceasefire between the FARC militia in Colombia and the Colombian government. So Cuba has a role to play in Latin America. It is integral that we shore up this relationship so we can have a greater amount of influence on the policy that comes forward.
Roland, I got lots of comments from people yesterday asking what does this mean for Assata Shakur? As I asked Congressman Rangel, the woman who escaped from prison in New Jersey in 1979 is now in exile in Cuba. This is what was sent to me from the State Department, yes, actually from the Obama White House. Bernadette Mihan, National Security Council spokeswoman, said, quote, "We will continue to press for the return of the U.S. fugitives in Cuba to pursue justice for the victims of their crimes in our engagement with the Cuban government." Your thoughts on that?
Cuba is not going to collaborate with the FBI in returning these individuals. I think that Cuba will lose face within Central and South America if they engage in that type of collaboration. So I do not see any exchange of prisoners with respect to that collaboration with the FBI. It's not going to happen.
All right, Roland Roebuck, I certainly appreciate it. Thanks a bunch. Good name there, sir. Thank you very much. Coming up, folks, we're going to have more with our panel. Plus, we'll hear from Rosario Dawson about